Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talk Nerdy. Today is Monday, January 16th, 2023, and I'm the host of the show, Cara Santa Maria, and we've got a fascinating chat for you today, as we always do. But before we dive into it, I do want to thank those of you who continue to make Talk Nerdy possible. We are in, I think, our 7th year of the show, and so many of you have been supporting for so long, and I just couldn't be more grateful. So this week, I want to give a shout out to the top patrons. They include Daniel Lang, David J.E. Smith, Mary Neva, Brian Holden, David Compton, Gabrielle F. Jaramillo Gonzalez, Joe Wilkinson, Pasquale Gelati, Ulrika Hagman, and everyone else who makes this show possible week after week after week after week. Thank you, thank you, thank you. If you are interested in pledging your support, you can visit patreon.com/talknerdy to learn more. All right, so let's talk about this week's episode. I had the opportunity to chat with Samantha Zwicker. She goes by Sam. She's a PhD candidate currently, and she's also the founder of a nonprofit organization called Hoja Nueva. It's a wildlife rescue and rehabilitation center in Peru, in the Peruvian Amazon. And they combat wildlife trafficking by rescuing and rewilding key species. They also built this brilliant ecological research station to do education in the Madre de Dios region of the rainforest. She and her group, of course, have rescued hundreds of wild animals, and they're currently fighting to preserve, over 7,000 acres of rainforest. And they were recently featured, and when I say recently, I mean 2 weeks ago, or maybe a little more as of this, the airing of this show, in a beautiful documentary on Amazon Prime Video called Wildcat. She's going to tell you all about her interests, all about the cats that she works with, and the incredible work that she's doing in both her academic research and her nonprofit work to help protect these key species within the Amazon rainforest. So without any further ado, here she is, Samantha Zwicker. Well, Sam, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So I'm super excited. This is kind of random, but I got an email a while back from Stephanie, who works kind of in publicity, right? And I'm assuming that she's working on the documentary that you've been involved with, but she also worked with me on a TV show that I used to work on with Nat Geo. So it's kind of a random, person who knows a person who knows a person who knows you. But she was like, I think you guys would get along. We're both PhD candidates, it looks like. Ooh. We're both doing quite a bit of science communication, but you're doing heavy field research. I'm in a clinical psychology setting. So used to be a scientist, switched over to psychology. But I love ecology, and I've had a lot of great ecologists on the show. And you're doing your work in a place that I've kind of visited before, but of course, this is your second home, right? Tell me a little bit about what you're studying, kind of what university you're at, and where you're doing your field work.
Yeah, I would say, at this point, it's definitely my home. I've been here over 9 years. And
wow, full time?
Yeah, I became a resident in late 2019 because I was spending, at least 6 months a year here. And at that point, you need to apply for residency to stay over that 6-month period per year in Peru. And so been more full time, more 11 months out of the year since then. And yeah, it's kind of my home now, but I do get to visit my family back in the Seattle area every once in a while.
So are you living full time in the forest?
Yes, in the forest.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
So you're not spending a lot of time in major cities, but you're really spending your time in the field.
Yeah, in the field. We have a pretty remote field site at Hoja Nueva. So we have a reserve. It's about 7,000 acres. We have a research center and then our rewilding center. And I spend full time there. became a lot easier to spend all my time there as soon as we got a little bit more access to things like satellite Wi-Fi, for example, which of course, being in a PhD program and all of the work that I have to do admin level for the nonprofit, it was definitely necessary to get Wi-Fi. And so as soon as that became a possibility, we installed Wi-Fi in late 2020, which was just life-changing after using satellite GPS kind of like communication, sending text to the city when you need food, that type of thing. Was life-changing. So now I get to spend full time there.
Incredible. Okay, so let's rewind. We're gonna leave the rainforest for a second. We'll come back to it. So you said that you grew up, or you're originally from sort of an island near Seattle.
Yes, grew up in an island called Bainbridge Island. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so when you were growing up, were you always gravitating towards nature, towards science? Like, when did you first discover this passion for ecology?
Yeah, I think so towards animals and nature, definitely from a really young age. I was, always embedded in nature. The houses kind of that we lived in. I mean, my first house was this little log house on the island. My dad and mom were, cutting wood for a living. We were very much embedded in nature from a very early age, my siblings and I. And like always rescuing animals, to be honest, just here and there, domestic and wild. And then high school, I got really into biology. Not saying it was like my strong suit necessarily, but I was really into it. Was very excited about it. And then I guess, like the biggest turning point for me was in college. I was introduced to some of these more environmental science courses that really shed a light on some of the issues that wild animals are facing globally. And, you start to talk more about climate change. I mean, this was back in, 2009 when that was becoming a much bigger conversation. And I just knew that it was something that I wanted to, fight for and be a part of in some large way.
Yeah. Okay. And so then did you go into college to study biology? Like, how did you start to craft your academic experience once you had a little bit more control, like we all do when we first leave high school?
Yeah, I think I went into biology. It was supposed to be more zoology focused, which was actually a program that the UW, the University of Washington, where I still am, it kind of like almost like let go of a little bit. And I think in my biology courses, I was really enjoying it, but then I kind of got into ecology, more of like the wildlife sciences, which is specifically out of the College of the Environment, and the section that we have that's called School of Environmental and Forest Sciences. And so I've kind of like found classes within that realm, and they just all felt, like really natural to me, like classes on endangered species and like conservation ecology and things like that just really like spoke to me and felt like really like it wasn't even like you were like, it was fun learning. It was really like, it was like passion, So I think that was kind of when everything started.
I love that. Okay. And so of course, a biology degree helps us learn an awful lot. An undergraduate degree helps us be exposed to the things that we need, learn some laboratory or field skills. But really, it's in graduate school where we get to start asking important questions, research questions that maybe haven't been answered, and are empowered to start that journey into exploration in a really meaningful way. So did you go straight through? How did you decide that you were ready and that you wanted to pursue kind of advanced education?
Yeah, I went straight through. And at the time, I was, like you said, I was really kind of experimenting with so many things as an undergrad. I had volunteered and done internships in various labs, whether it was, much more like research oriented or maybe field work. I did restoration ecology because I was really interested in, potentially in the future, like restoring like whole ecosystems or landscapes and what that means. And I kind of dabbled in as much as I possibly could. And, it wasn't, I found an internship with a conservation ecology lab, and it brought me to Peru. So I was kind of interning and helping out a student with his project in Peru. And that kind of translated into my own potential master's project, which is why I was like, okay, this makes sense. And then the professor wanted to take me on as a master's student straight out of undergrad. And so it was like a very natural transition. And, so I did my master's research in, one of the most understudied places in Peru, which was a dream for me. I went down as an intern, kind of explored a bit, but then found this place that I really loved, and people hadn't done this type of research there, wildlife, population level research, and especially human human impact research, which is really kind of like what I'm most interested in. And so it kind of, started from there, and I did my master's project. I don't know. I look back and I'm like, oh my gosh, my master's is really not that great. But you're like, oh my gosh.
Looking back, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm like, like I'm like hopeful that people don't read that, but
those are like our training wheels a little bit.
Totally, it was instrumental in kind of like, okay, this is what grad school is. This is what doing everything on your own is, and like, what it can become, and from there it was. I mean, it's been amazing, but also very difficult because I was forced to be super independent, like I've never had like a super huge support level coming from the university. And of course I didn't have that in Peru because it's, you're starting from scratch in a place where there's not a lot of people doing what you're doing. And so it was kind of, stop and go there for a little bit.
Yeah. So I'm super interested, and you mentioned it, but we kind of like rushed through it. So I want to spend a little bit of time because I'm curious from a more like human perspective. A, what was the opportunity to first go there? And B, how did that turn into, because this happens a lot, right? Like, oh, there's a little field project, or I have the opportunity to go on this trip. But like, how did that actually change into, this is my life. This is the work I want to do. Like I found my place.
Yeah, it's a strange transition. I think it was, numerous things happening all at once, like getting the opportunity to, be a part of someone else's project, which was kind of like an introduction. I also got, I like to say I got lucky because I feel like sometimes getting grants is very lucky, very hit or miss as well. I got like a grant for camera traps because, part of my dream was to be able to study wildlife in a very non-invasive way. And I just loved the idea of being able to capture like these hidden lives of, elusive species on camera. And so I did get lucky. I got a really good grant for camera traps. And I was like, okay, like this is happening, and I think the biggest turning point was when I was introduced to the region of Las Piedras, which, if you know Tambopata, it's a little bit north, completely unprotected area, as opposed to Tambopata, which is, the national park. And of course they have issues on the buffer zones, but Las Piedras is like this huge connective tissue between numerous protected parks, but it's completely unprotected, and it's facing lots of issues in terms of, slash and burn agriculture for cacao and papaya mostly, of course, selective logging and some of these more, more illegal timber operations. And, I kind of
got gold mining. Is that happening there as well?
Yeah, gold mining exists on the southern portion of Las Piedras as you go into more of the Periamanu River. But luckily, we just haven't had that level of, it hasn't gone beyond like agriculture. And,
right, okay.
That's really something we're trying to keep at bay as conservationists along the river, and in the communities as well that also don't want mining to come into play. So right now it's mostly just agriculture, and it does of course have an impact, but not nearly the level of impact that gold mining has in southern Peru.
Yeah. So when we think about, the Amazon rainforest, we think about the Peruvian side, or really the Amazon as a whole. For most people living on this planet today, the Amazon is an idea. It's not really something that most people have been lucky enough to have the opportunity to experience firsthand. And before we even get into your work, I want to kind of maybe try with our words, because this is, of course, a podcast and nobody can see, but hopefully we can maybe paint a little bit of a verbal picture. I'm always curious, how you experience the forest and how you might talk about the forest to somebody who's never been there, who maybe has like caricatured versions of what the forest is or does or looks like in their mind, because you're somebody who knows it. Like, the trails, like this is your life, this is your love, and this is home to you now. But for a lot of people, the Amazon, like they don't understand what's, let's say, managed and what's not. What do we actually consider to be wild, and how much human intervention really is there? How many people are present? Just maybe help us understand where you live and what the experience is like for you.
Yeah, as you said, it's really hard to describe in words, mostly because if you've experienced it for so long and it feels, natural, it's hard to describe to people, from the outside. And I always make the mistake when people come down, like I don't give people enough of like an intro, because some of the things I'm so used to, like, okay, don't stand up on a boat, and people stand up on the boat and then it's just like wobbling all over and then they're terrified. It's just like little things like that. But I mean, I like to describe it as like, this is a weird analogy. This is like a weird description, I guess. But like if people who are watching, for example, like those news shows about like settlers, like 1883 that are related to like Yellowstone and people going out and like exploring like the plains and stuff. And it's like, the way that they describe the plains and like it being kind of like the wild, wild west and stuff is like how I felt when I first went there. I mean, it's just like you fly in, and at that point, I mean, the runway wasn't even paved. You fly in and it's just green everywhere and it's all consuming. It's untouched in some of these places, and you can go on a walk in some places and it's a place that another human being has never, ever been before. And I think, you kind of, with time, that just becomes like so normal, but it's not, like not a lot of people get to experience nature in that way. And environments that are like intact, where like you can see and feel and hear everything around you is just like it's supposed to be the way it is. And like in these other areas, like even where I grew up, which was beautiful and quite a natural place, it's, you don't get to experience that kind of overwhelming, all-encompassing natural feeling. And I think, of course it's the jungle as well, right? So you've got those added aspects of like how dense it is and sometimes how like dark it can be. And, from the birds in the morning to the insects at night, just like the chorus is just like, you can't even hear yourself think. But there's something that's so beautiful about that because you just know that like everything's in its like rightful place. That's the
love
best I can do, I
that.
think.
I love that. And I know that I've mentioned this a couple of times on the show. So to my kind of diehard listeners who have been around with me, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but bear with me. I'll only spend a few seconds on this. But for those who like don't listen to every episode, I feel like I need to mention, somewhat recently, I had, I'm scrolling back to older episodes. I had Karen Backer on the show to talk about her book Sounds of Nature, and she's a Canadian ecologist who has been studying, or actually I don't know if her title is ecologist. No, she's got like a multidisciplinary title, but how digital technology helps us produce these soundscapes to look at the health of ecological connections. And then previous to that, I had a few different people on the show to talk about their experience in the Peruvian Amazon, but for rainforest expeditions, so more like McCall research and other field research. And anyway, what I wanted to mention was that my experience when I first showed up to the Amazon was, I don't think uncommon, but really strange for me in that, number one, there was a friaje. So like it was a little quieter than usual simply because of this like weather event. But number two, I am a city person. And so like when I first went on my night hike, like the day I got there, I was like, where is everything that's alive? Like I could not see any of the biodiversity except for obviously the trees, the plants and things. But it was very hard for me to like notice the insects, to notice the traces of all of the different organisms because I just wasn't attuned to them yet. And having those like nature eyes, it took me almost the whole week that I was there to even start to develop them. And I mean, and mine weren't remotely anywhere near the eyes that the guides had. So I'm curious for you, it's maybe something that you take for granted now because you're so attuned. But did it take you a long time to really feel like you got it? Like you were almost a part of this landscape?
Yeah, definitely. It took, I would say, took a number of years for me to probably feel completely like in tune, comfortable, like I really kind of understood better everything that was happening around me. And I mean, I I'm pretty open about like my first ever night in the actual jungle. I mean, I had spent time near Puerto helping out the student, as I was saying at the time, more in the mining areas, and so I didn't have that experience of like jungle, like beautiful intact jungle yet. But my first night in the jungle, I actually arrived at night. And it was a bit terrifying. It was not during a friaje, so it was like bugs and insects and sounds and everything. And I remember getting there and just being like, oh my gosh, these people are putting their headlamps on and going for a night. They're going out at night in the jungle.
Yeah. They're like big,
and I was like,
mud boots on. Yeah.
Right. And like at the time you feel like such a little dummy because you're like, oh my God, are you guys going to be okay? And then I was like, okay, this is normal. It's fine. They're going to be fine. They obviously do this, and then it takes, a couple of days, and I started going on night walks, and it felt really normal after, a week or so. And I think you just kind of get adjusted to that. I'm sorry that you came in a friaje. That's like not the best time to come down. There's definitely like, it feels totally different during those couple of days.
I know it's a bit of a bummer, but I will say it was like the weather was a little more manageable because of that. So that was kind of nice, but there was quite a bit of rain and it was quite wet. And yeah, I didn't get to see as many things as I could have, but at the same time, I think it was an experience. What I loved about the experience was that transition from like my city eyes to my nature eyes. And even though, for me, maybe I went 5% of the way there, it was profound because we just don't, I don't even know what the right words are to use for this, but it literally is a skill to listen, to see, to notice, to be present that we don't often have living in cities.
Yeah. And I mean, you also have to have, it's a combination of skills, but also definitely luck to see, especially mammals in the jungle at night or in the day. Or, you have to be quite lucky because in that dense of an environment, I mean, that's why most people have those kind of wildlife encounters, mostly on the river or with seeing wildlife on beaches and things like that. Because, when you're in the dense jungle, it's almost impossible sometimes to actually see things. So people, when they come down, they expect to see, I'm going to see a jaguar. And it's like, well, if you say that, it's probably not going to happen.
Oh, yeah. My expectations for that were well managed by my friend Jason. But I definitely, I really saw, I saw macaw. I saw a lot of different birds. I saw a harpy eagle. And then I saw maybe a few monkeys. Probably in terms of mammals, it was a few monkeys and some capybara, like actually on the river. Like you said, kind of on the banks of the rivers where I saw the capybara. But otherwise, maybe just a couple monkeys. I heard the howlers. I never saw a howler, but you definitely wake up hearing them. But I didn't see any, predators. I didn't see anything like and I shouldn't even call them predators. I don't know what the right word to use would be, but I didn't see anything like what you study. And that's what I would love to dive into is like, what are the organisms that you have a particular affinity for? I want to know about the nonprofit that you founded and run, and also how it relates or does it relate to the actual academic research that you're doing.
Yeah. So yeah, OHA, when I founded it in 2015, it was more at that time, it was because I had, these kind of strong ties. I had been living in the local community for quite a while on and off. Of course, at that time, didn't have any land, but the community actually offered me my first piece of land, which was 30 hectares. I mean, in terms of like in the States and stuff, that's a ton of land, right? But down there, that's what different people in the community were getting per person. And so I was like, yeah, I'm going to go for it. It was 30 hectares of pristine rainforest, and it was only $900. So I was like, yeah, and the money kind of goes into this pool for the community, and then it's used by the community for different efforts. And so OHA was constructed, like our first center was constructed on that land, and we were more aimed at, community development, working in waste and water, a little bit into education. And then my wildlife research was kind of on the side. It was one of the missions of OHA to study the populations, but I definitely wanted to focus on things like agroforestry because, looking at the bigger picture of conservation, I was like, okay, these are the areas which, I don't have these skills yet, but I feel like, if we work in sustainable cacao, for example, I feel like we could maybe make a difference.
Okay, so to be clear, you were doing, so the Hoja Nueva you started after you had already been there for quite some time. You were already doing your research for your dissertation. So maybe let's take a step back from Hoja Nueva and come back to it, just so that like, I don't know, I can keep the chronology clear. What were you studying? What did you decide to do for your dissertation topic?
Yeah. So for my master's, I decided to look at, well, I was going to specialize like hopefully in felids. I wanted to research kind of like the wildcat populations and more specifically like how they were being impacted by humans in different ways. And at the time, I was really, for my master's, more focused a little bit on, their movements and patterns, and then hopefully was going to move that into a dissertation focused on human impact, like how are they responding to these agricolas, like agricultural areas? How are they responding to road networks, like new road networks being built? So it kind of like, has transitioned over time. And my research now is still very much, like looking at anthropogenic activities, how wildlife is responding, but also like what are the interspecific relationships between these cats? Like one thing that we don't completely understand yet is like, how do we have in our area, at least 5 kind of sympatric predators, like these 5 felids that clearly coexist in the same spaces. But how are they doing that? And how are they doing that in response to human activities? Are humans changing the way that they're interacting? How is that going to play out? Like, are some of them more adapting better than others? So those are all kind of the different themes of my dissertation. I can get more into the weeds on it a little bit if you'd like.
What are the cats? I'd love to know, like, what are the 5 cats that exist where you are, or that you're actually really focused on studying?
Yeah, so jaguars and are the kind of apex predator, but not close. I mean, very close behind would be the puma. And then in the very middle, you've got the ocelot, and below that are margays and jaguarundis.
Okay.
Jaguarundis and margays are, I would say, quite elusive, especially jaguarundis, extremely understudied. There's just not much research at all. And so a lot of my work has transitioned into focusing on those 2 species. But I do just focus on all 5. And those are the 5 in our region.
Very cool. I'm Googling them all as we talk because the last 2, I'm like, I don't even know what those look like. So I'm pulling them up so that I have a visual. How do you spell oh, there it is, margay. So that I have a visual of these cats, and they're fascinating looking. The jaguarundis are weird looking.
Yep, they're a little weird.
Yeah, they're interesting. Like, obviously pumas, many people, at least the listeners who are listening from the US, are aware of puma, mountain lion, panther, what are all the different names that we have for them, because we have them up in North America as well. Jaguars we're maybe aware of, ocelots because we may have seen them in zoos, for example. But it's, yeah, I mean, would you say I'm wrong in saying that jaguarundis and margays are like a little bit less commonly known?
Definitely. Yeah, I didn't know what they were until I started working in the region.
They're really, and margays are really cute. Am I allowed to say that? They're so cute.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
You probably shouldn't be thinking that they're cute, but they are. And so is there any particular, obviously you said you work with all 5 of these species and you're fascinated by kind of their place, their ecological niche, but also the way that human activity is affecting them. Are there any that you have found a particular affinity for or a special relationship that you've developed?
Yeah, I would say ocelots and margays, and that is half because of, the research, because I'm just fascinated by things that, I've found, or, just like behavioral things, or, just through the research aspect. But then the other half is raising them because they're very common in the pet trade, unfortunately. So we do
adorable. Yeah,
so
I mean, you can see why.
Yeah, exactly.
Are they, I mean, is the reason that they're common in the pet trade mostly because of how they look, or is it because they're sadly just easier to capture, easier to control? Like, what reasons kind of feed into that?
I mean, they're extremely hard to capture. Most people
really
take them as baby. I mean, you would have to take them as a baby. And that's very it's a mix, depending on where you are in the country of Peru. In the south, it's very opportunistic. I mean, people going out to collect timber or castaña, Brazil nuts, they would opportunistically take baby animals from the wild to sell because it's economical, right? Whereas there are places that it's an actual industry, like it's a commercial thing. You go to any public market and people are selling wild animals or wildlife parts, in the north of Peru, generally in the Loreto region in Iquitos. And yeah, it's super unfortunate. I think there is a strong international demand, but most of the demand actually comes from within the country of Peru to have them as pets. And they're ferocious wild animals. I would never ever want one as a pet. I mean, at 3 months old, when 3 to 4 months old is when we kind of transition them away from human contact, and that's as much for us as it is for the animals, because they are. I mean, the ocelot, for example, grows to be about 35 pounds. I mean, sometimes 40 pounds. That's like a medium-sized dog with huge canines and claws. So they don't make good pets, but I think because of how beautiful they are, people want them as pets, and then they do horrible things like, grind down their teeth and take out their claws and make them into pets.
It's such an obvious and low-hanging fruit for something that can change, but it is really devastating because it sounds to me like, just like we see the international trade in animal parts for traditional medicine purposes or for power prestige purposes, social status, social class, just like the trade in whole animals for pets. I mean, which obviously I think probably has to do with social status and social class as well. It sounds like sadly, it's an educational issue more than anything.
Yeah, I would say so as well. Educational, I think there's lots of work to be done in the realm of education. I mean, for all species. I think for cats, it's more so just how these animals do not make good pets and how taking them from the wild is affecting the wild populations. I mean, in our experience, at least for the most part, when baby wild cats are taken, generally the people who are taking them are not able to like find the mother or kill the mother. Like it is very much like they are cutting hardwood trees, and maybe in the process of that they find a den and they take the babies. So the only kind of like silver lining of it is that the mothers are still out there, whereas there are so many animals that are hunted for both bushmeat, like all the different species of monkeys that people both eat and then opportunistically will take the babies, like they would shoot the mother with the purpose of knowing that they could eat the mother and have the baby to sell. So that isn't, the intention, I guess, for cat species.
Right. They're not being killed to eat, for example. There's so many things that come up for me when we talk about hunting, when we talk about capturing, or I should say poaching, honestly, like unsanctioned. So poaching, capturing the wildlife trade of whole animals or animal parts, which is this very complicated position that I can assume you must find yourself in, being, a white woman living in a place where you're not indigenous and doing this kind of research and having, a point of view that's informed by the literature, that's informed by understanding the threatened nature and the tenuous nature of these animals, but is also needing to be culturally responsive and humble about sort of what you can and can't say about shoulds. So I'm curious how you navigate that, both professionally, but also even just with locals that you work with.
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, for Hoja Nueva we created an actual rescue center, an official rescue center in 2020. And that has helped greatly because we were working kind of like in a temporary custody center of wildlife that didn't really have other options up until then. Like the government would bring us, cats or sometimes monkeys. And basically animals that were really close to being ready for release, and we just had to work with for a short period of time and release them. But we decided to create like a registered rescue center, which also gives us a little bit of autonomy. It gives us a little bit more of a say. Like we get to work hand in hand with both local and federal governments, sometimes daily or weekly. And so you get to learn a lot about how things work. I mean, it's been such like a growing learning process over the last couple of years since kind of officially forming our center. But yeah, as you mentioned, like some of the most I would say, like difficult situations that I've been in are, going through a community, usually not like the communities in which I have relationships in, because that's a little bit different, but like, just if I'm either traveling or I'm in a new place or I'm in the city, coming across people that have wild animals as pets, and things like that. Like, of course, you have to be humble and respectful and understand that, like, people who have a wild animal as a pet generally want the best for it. They generally are trying to take care of it. And it's just kind of understanding that perspective, and trying to do the best you can in the moment to kind of create that education a little bit. Like, it depends on the situation, but for the most part, we, because I am a foreigner but most of our team is Peruvian, I actually rely on either other members of my team or on the local government officials to kind of step in and handle those types of situations, because it makes more sense. As much as I wish I could blend in, I don't really stick out a little bit. So yeah, I think it's, relying on the people who have that rapport. But it does get complicated because, coming across, maybe a paca or a peccary, which are extremely common as pets. People usually take them as babies, but they take them and grow them. They take them as pets to eat them eventually. That's very common. So that's one thing. But then coming across something like a jaguar or a tapir, which are, either threatened or endangered, it's a different story. And like, the government also takes it a lot more seriously. So when those situations come up, it's automatically, they bring the police, they bring, it's like the environmental police, they bring like all the members of their department. So it just kind of depends on the situation, how it's handled.
Yeah, it sounds like ethically things can be complicated because everything's sort of on a continuum, right? Like, you have everything from a plentiful and common organism to something that is, heavily threatened and protected by the government against poaching, all the way to the continuum between, for example, animals that are poached through organized crime versus, let's say an indigenous family who's living in the forest and there's an injured animal that they rehab and it, kind of sticks around. They feed it, it becomes part of the, and like,
Totally.
at what point is this an ethical problem? At what point is this an education problem? And at what point is it like, okay, this is what you and your culture have always done. And who am I to come in and say, you probably shouldn't be doing that?
Totally. I think, yeah, that's a great example. And, both have happened. So it's, you have to kind of analyze everything in the moment. And I would say the latter situation that we've come across, it's like, generally we don't do anything, unless the animal is in like dire need of medical help, in which case we would just contact the government, get permission to give it medical care if that's what the people would want, and then, leave the situation be. I mean, you have to also pick your battles. And for us, like, we're very focused as a rewilding center on the species that do, and the individuals that have the chance at living a wild life. And generally, if you find, this has been a pet for 4 years, they don't have as good of a chance as an animal that was taken a week ago and that they plan on selling and not keeping. It totally depends on the situation.
Right, right. And I can imagine as well, I think one of the things that I've talked about more in the context of African wildlife and hunting versus poaching in Africa and education around canned hunting and around these like exposés around wildlife, kind of like tourist trap, abuse of wildlife, that there's this complicated messaging that somebody like yourself, who is actively working to rehabilitate and re-release animals, but obviously you're in close contact with animals a lot. I personally, the snobby person that I am, when I'm on a dating app and I see like somebody, an option, a potential like guy or girl I want to date, posing with an elephant or posing with a cheetah, I'm like, swipe no. Clearly this person is not educated.
I appreciate
clearly
that.
like this person is engaging in something that I vehemently disagree with. But for the general public who's not involved in the sciences, who's not involved in conservation work, how are they supposed to know the difference between like good touch and bad touch with an animal? Like, oh, this person's doing something valid and legitimate, whereas these people over here are doing something for financial gain that's actually harmful ecologically. It's a complicated thing. So is that part of the, the science communication that you do?
Oh, definitely. I would say it's also, been a learning curve over the years for me personally of like, wanting to share these kind of like parts of your life, either because they're so beautiful or they're so painful. And, that's kind of, what Wildcat is, the film, that came out, which I didn't have control over what was put in it. Right. And so I've had to kind of go back and do a little bit of damage control with certain aspects of it. Because it was life before our rescue center was officially formed and registered. And during that time, I was, we did have kind of like, at least I didn't, but like one person did have too much contact. And so it's, we do things entirely different now. So that's kind of what I'd like to focus on. But kind of like this film coming out has kind of brought a lot of those things to light again of like, okay, how do we, post about these types of things in a way that's like engaging, that gets people interested, that gets them to care, that gets them to donate to our cause, but it doesn't send the wrong message. And it's just like, I mean, it's difficult sometimes to navigate. And I think, like I said, the film has made it a little bit more difficult in that way. But I think it's also made it's weird. It's like both. It's like easier because when people get the whole story, and it's not just like a post on social media where people don't read the caption, then they kind of understand in a larger way. So yeah, I mean, it's just something that we struggle with like every day as like, what do we say? What do we share? What do we not share? Because I mean, we're not sharing maybe 99% of some of these things. So yeah.
Yeah, I hear you. And I mean, honestly, that's why I brought it up, because I love this existing in this gray area, this nuance, this place where the ethics become complicated and where you can really grapple with these questions. That's probably why I'm very drawn to human behavior and human psychology. That said, we're now living in a globally connected culture that's like, on Twitter and TikTok scale. Like, we don't want any context. We just want the snippet. And out of context, as you mentioned, a lot of these things are really difficult. So, I'm curious about, like you mentioned Wildcat. I would love to talk about it a little bit. I'm curious about, maybe you can tell us a little bit about the film. I know you're like featured heavily in it. What was the experience like for you? Where can people actually see it? And I think it's good that you mentioned, like, even though you're a subject of the film, you did not make the film, and that's important to be clear about.
Yeah. So the film, I mean, long story, but so before we rescued our first ocelot in 2016, and his name was Khan, and he came to us kind of like in the way that I described, someone from farther upriver who was collecting. I think it was like a mix of timber and castagna, had like opportunistically taken a couple of animals. And so they were in the local community wanting to take him to the city of Puerto Maldonado to sell. And just, happened to be able to kind of interfere in that situation and convince them that there was a better option. And so, a lot of Khan's life, I made like an effort to document it, essentially like, raising him for release, a process that, hadn't really been done before, or if it hadn't been documented. I'd reached out to a couple of my mentors at the time and people like biologists that had been working in either that area or in just like in Latin America with cats. And they were kind of like, yeah, you're on your own with this one.
Right.
And it was a process. So I don't know if you've seen the film, but it is a story about two ocelots. And basically we came in contact with filmmakers after the first ocelot. And because of the archival footage that I had like really put a lot of effort into, they wanted to make a short documentary, like one of those like 25-minute documentaries. And that grew into a potential feature-length film when we received our second male ocelot in 2018. And the filmmakers were kind of interested in following, bits and pieces here and there. They didn't have any direct contact with our second ocelot, Keanu, in terms of filming him or ever seeing him in it or anything like that. But they kind of taught us how to use cameras a little bit better. And
gotcha.
And it became a feature-length film, and it's a very different film than one that I had ever kind of envisioned, because it is, something that it's about, these wildcats, but it's also, got some mental health aspects that are very intense about it. It's about, life living in an isolated environment in the jungle. It's about all of the beauty and all of the pain that comes with, wildlife rehabilitation for release. And really, it's an origin story of Hoja Nueva and an origin story of the work that I do now. Because after those experiences, my kind of vision for what I wanted for my life and for Hoja Nueva shifted. And that's what kind of led to the creation of the first carnivore rewilding center in Peru, which is what we operate now. And so, yeah, it's been a very long journey, but the film, because it touches on all these different aspects in it showed very closely. It featured so this guy named Harry, who has I would say it's a little bit too close of a relationship with the second ocelot, Keanu. And because it's like a healing, it's like how nature can help heal you, and how Keanu helped him to heal while Keanu was being rehabilitated for a wild life. And from, the public view, I think most people viewed it as like, they understood it. They found it very beautiful and impactful. I think that from a science perspective, from the science community, I mean, I haven't had any messages yet, but, it's something that I was kind of prepared for, is being like, okay, like, clearly these beings had too much interaction. There was a point where like it should have been cut off and it wasn't. And of course, being a subject in the film, I did not make the film. And of course, not everything that happened is in the film.
Right. Yeah. You can only ever see what's included and not what's in the cutting room floor. But yeah, I mean, I see a parallel kind of in my mind, and it's probably not exact or appropriate, but for my listeners, just last week, the episode that I aired was another interview with Beth Pratt, who's the California regional director, or executive director for the National Wildlife Federation. And we had a conversation about P22, the resident mountain lion in Los Angeles that was just euthanized. And we had previously talked about P22, and his origin story, but this time we had to talk about his death and the context around Beth's experience as almost like his agent. Like, she made him famous, and she got a lot of pushback from scientists who were like, you shouldn't give an animal a name. You shouldn't give an animal an identity. Like, this is not appropriate from a scientific perspective. But because of the work that she did, we now have a multi-million-dollar wildlife crossing being built in Los Angeles. Because of the work that she did, most of the residents of Los Angeles know about the cat that lived in Griffith Park by name. And that's like, this idea of like weighing what is best for the animals versus what is best for the people. It's never going to be a perfect algorithm for you, is it? Because this is about coexistence. It's not about removing all people from the forest, and it's not about putting all animals into wildlife reserves. It's about finding what the best possible strategy is, knowing that our behavior is not good for these creatures.
Definitely. I mean, as you mentioned earlier, it's all, we're swimming in a sea of gray. It's a big gray area. And I would say, for her work, I think that it made a huge difference in making people aware of and connect to an individual puma that, is now going to hopefully potentially save the lives of other pumas and, help that population. So I think there's different ways to look at it, just like there's so many ways to look at, the situation that we kind of put ourselves in, and in terms of, how much interaction that we have with animals, which, like I said, has changed greatly. And then how much of that we make apparent to the world. Because there's also a side of it that's like, okay, a lot of this hasn't been done before, or at least shared if it has been. So we want to share it so that other organizations that are registered, that, have all the proper paperwork and specialists involved, can actually, implement some of this, because we feel like it's making a difference. And here's the things that aren't, here are the things that aren't working. Here are the horrible things, here are all the things that we've tried that have failed. And, sometimes those are the most important things to share. And they're oftentimes kind of like swept under the rug. I wish people had told me all of the ways they had failed before I started a nonprofit in a foreign country,
Right. I mean, and that opens up a whole other conversation we could have, which we won't because we don't have time, but that we could have about the way that science is done, the way that we are not really, it's not really incentivized to share about negative results or to share about failures. And not just science, but here, I think I can say pretty safely in the Western world. I don't want to make a broad and sweeping generalization, but in the Western world, and especially in the United States, that the culture is failure is something to be ashamed of, not failure is how we learn and how we grow. And so it's something that we should celebrate. And I can imagine the pressure that you, but not just you, anybody in this position would be under to be like, the very thing that I want to share is the very thing that I get the most pushback about.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, that's a great way to put it. I think there is so much so much more that we could share, but you just don't really feel like it's going to have an impact, or maybe it'll have a negative one. And we wouldn't want to affect our own efforts or our future, to be able to help more wild animals. So yeah, it's
Yeah,
a good one.
yeah. So tell me, I mean, as we're sort of running up against the clock, I want to know more about Hoja Nueva. Like, what is your kind of central mission, and what are some of the projects that you're actively working on?
Yeah, so we at OHA have generally three pillars, which are applied conservation, ecological research, and rewilding. And over the past couple of years, we've definitely focused on our rewilding efforts, put a lot of our funds into the creation of our veterinary center, of our infrastructure around essentially like the enclosures and everything that these animals have. In a way that minimizes human contact in some ways as well. We've really focused on, cats, but we also receive a lot of coatis. Basically, mesopredators is kind of our focus. And yeah, we've learned so much in a short period of time, but we've also been rescuing lots of animals. I think we've made it over the 60 mark as of a couple of days ago. So we work at the federal level now. The government is sending us cats even from the region of Loreto that I mentioned earlier that has a lot of trade, especially in cats. But it's different. It's not like we're receiving these 3-4 week old baby animals. We're receiving animals that come from all types of backgrounds that have both physical and psychological traumas, where we have to assess every single individual differently and have different protocols per individual. So it's been a huge period of learning and growing and, doing our best for the animals that have come to us. All things that we hope to share, even the failures. And then kind of at the same time, but we've kind of put the other two on the back burner because we had, before the rewilding center, it's not like the 7,000 acres came out of nowhere, like we have been building up. We've built a micro corridor in the kind of like agricultural association, of course, with the help of the local community. And speaking of which, I don't know if you've heard about like the protests going on in Peru, but the community has been so amazing. They just delivered us like so much produce today to help us out through this like crazy time we're
That's
having.
wonderful.
Yeah. And then, like the research efforts are ongoing. Hopefully I will be finishing my PhD in spring. That would be great.
No way. Oh, you're on track to finish before me. I'm looking at the July, August, I think. Yeah.
Oh, that's still great. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm hoping to finish in spring. I guess you never really know when things
Right.
come up. But yeah, and I think, it's kind of paved the way, like the research side of things. We've got such a strong database. I've just kind of made a concerted effort every year putting out these grids for, some of those apex predators and the mesopredators, gathering data. So we've got these like long-term data sets, like really strong databases for local species that a lot of researchers want to work with. And so we're starting to get, I think we have like 6 or 7 researchers arriving this month, people who are going to be working with our data that we already have, doing more research. Definitely exciting times, but we're still in that, epic growth stage, getting back into more of the research and just doing the best we can.
So I'm curious, I mean, and I have no idea who's listening to this episode right now, but when I generally think about the audience that has been with me for years and years and years at this point, I think of it as a big mix between people who are very like scientifically enthusiastic, people who just love science and that's why they listen to the show, all the way to people who are sort of in it, like they are in the brass tacks, in the nitty gritty of science, and they're actively working on degrees or they're practicing scientists. And so I'm curious, given that broad range, how can individuals get involved with your work, all the way from maybe somebody who's like, I would love to support this work, so where do I go online to be able to like donate or support in some sort of monetary way, all the way to somebody who's like, ooh, this sounds interesting, are there research opportunities available?
Definitely. Yeah. So for people that are interested in supporting, we have a support page on our website on hojanueva.org. And then we also have like a kind of PayPal landing page for donations. And then definitely for research opportunities, generally, if it's, kind of like I don't really know what I want to do. I want to just learn everything I can, or I want to do a specific internship on this. We have an internship page on our website as well. It's just hojanueva.org/research. For people that are specifically on a track to, like veterinary sciences, for example, or specifically on a wildlife rehabilitation track, we accept maybe like 5 people per year to help in the wildlife rehabilitation center. Our rewilding center doesn't accept like visitors. So we're like a no tourist, no visitor policy, but we do accept people who are actually like studying and want to learn. And then, yeah, like I usually, when we have people who are doing their master's or their PhD, generally they'll contact me or Dylan, my co-director, directly via email. That's also an option, just to like speak about potential projects, because we've had quite a few master's and PhD students come through in the last couple of years. And yeah, super exciting to get more people now that we have our new research center up and running.
Amazing. Oh, it's so great. So there's so many opportunities to learn about and to read about. You guys have a beautiful website there at hojanueva.org. So you can read about all of that. Samantha, before I do have a couple closing questions that I want to ask you, because I always ask my guests the same 2 questions. But before we sort of switch gears to those, Sam, is there anything that sort of we haven't mentioned, I haven't explicitly asked you, that you wanted to make sure that we talked about today?
I don't think so. I think we've covered everything. I can't think of anything. Yeah.
Good. Awesome. If anything comes up, just interrupt me and let me know. Okay. So listen, I've been doing Talk Nerdy for a long time. I always ask my guests the same 2 questions at the end. I have no idea what I'm going to do. In my mind, I was like, ooh, I'm going to put it all together and make a thing. And that's like, hasn't happened in 7 years, but whatever. I still think it's interesting. So I'm going to ask you some questions that are kind of big picture questions. Bear with me. Don't worry. Take as much time as you need to answer them. And also answer in whatever context feels relevant to you. So basically, I want you to think about the future. And this could be the future of your work. It could be something personal in your life. This could be bigger than you. It could be, the community. It could be the global ecology. It could be cosmic answer it how you'd like to answer it. But number 1, when you think about the future, what is the thing that's keeping you up the most at night? The thing that you're really concerned about, and you're sometimes struggle with despair or pessimism or cynicism because it's like legitimately worrisome for you. And then on the flip side of that, so we don't end on such a depressing note, where are you finding your hope and your optimism? Like, what are you genuinely, authentically looking forward to?
Gosh, yeah, those are great and difficult
they're
questions.
Evil.
Oh gosh, I guess, there's so many things that keep me up at night. I'm like, which one do I choose? Yeah, I think, when you live and work in these places, kind of these remote places that are still intact, I think when you see the destruction firsthand and it feels like it's your home, like you have some sort of like connection and ownership to it, it's a little bit different. And I do have, like, now that you actually mentioned like nightmares, like I worry so much about the destruction of like such an important habitat ecosystem that is the Amazon rainforest at like this kind of larger scale. And I think about, all the animals that come to us. I have to, in my mind always, does this thing where it thinks about what their situation might have been and where they came from. And a lot of that is like being, ripped from their environment, usually ripped from their mother, what they could have possibly been feeling, what they're feeling now, like, and it's just like, it puts you into this like super dark place when you experience it all the time. I mean, like we got 4 babies in the last week alone. And so it's like you kind of get overwhelmed with this, like, what are we doing? And it kind of, it's just one of those, it's a very dark space to think about what animals go through due to our actions, and feeling helpless sometimes in affecting the level of change that you want to. Because for OHA, it's like, I know the future that I want for, wildlife in like the whole country of Peru, and for all of the ecosystems and for preservation and everything. And I can see it and I want that, but it's hard when, because our impact is like, it's pretty big for the amount of resources we have, but there's so much more that we could do. And you really want to address those root causes. And so I think, like what keeps me up at night is like knowing that like I'm close. I'm so much closer than I used to be, but I'm still not addressing those root causes like I know that I want to. I'm sorry, that's a long answer.
No. I mean, I hear you. Where are you finding your hope and your optimism in the face of that kind of difficulty?
Gosh, the funny thing is, like, it's ironic, but it's the same answer, like every text, every phone call that we get about an animal that needs us, that we're able to get to in time, that we're able to receive in time, or at least do our absolute best to be able to. I think that like being able to provide the opportunity for animals to return to the wild is something that like, not a lot of people can say they can be a part of. And it's, incredibly important on the individual level and often important on the population level. And, it gives me hope that some of the kind of newer methods we've been using have been working, and that, you can see this actually being successful, and that more people could be doing stuff like this. And it might make an impact at a larger scale long term for some of these populations where, maybe we're going to be able to start putting animals back into the wild at the same rate as they're coming out, as long as we're trying to, look at it and use a multifaceted approach to educate at the same time as rewild and those types of things. So I think the individual animals give me a lot of hope.
Oh, I love that. Well, I should say, Samantha Zwicker, soon to be Dr. Samantha Zwicker, love. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today. Everybody, you can learn more about her mission and see how you can become involved by visiting hojanueva.org. You can watch the documentary Wildcat on Prime Video. It's out now. I think it just came out last month, or 2 months ago. So you can see it now. Or actually, I think it only came out a month ago. So, gosh, Sam, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And yeah, it's only been up for 2 weeks, but it's been holding strong.
It's 2 weeks.
Yeah,
wow.
the top 10 of Amazon Prime. So check it out.
That's incredible. That's incredible. Oh gosh, wonderful. Yeah, I was looking at the trailer. The trailer had been out for 2 months that I was looking at, but of course the film just dropped 2 weeks ago. Thank you so much for being here. It's been an honor. It's been a pleasure. I've learned so much from you, and really like good luck in your future endeavors. And I'm rooting for you in your academic pursuits as well.
Oh, thanks so much. I right back at you. I hope that you do finish in July, August, because it's going to be great for both of us to be done.
And
thank you for having me. It was a great conversation.
Of course. And everyone listening, thank you for coming back week after week. I'm really looking forward to the next time we all get together to talk nerdy.